I don't think that there's one better anti-aging, life-enhancing substance or biohacking thing that you could do than supplementing with melatonin. Sleep is just a little piece of melatonin. Melatonin is made by every cell in your body. Every mitochondria makes it to quench oxidation. It's our primary antioxidant system. It even works in the gut. Melatonin is secreted by the lining of your intestines, and it stimulates microbiome swarming. And so your whole microbiome thrives on melatonin. Methylene blue mops up the inducible nitric oxide, which is the inflammatory nitric oxide, which is the nitric oxide that causes depression. And what elevates this is infections. And so now you have the root cause of the depression, which is the infection triggering the elevated nitric oxide, which then when you take methylene blue, it calms that down. In this modern world, there's just too many stressors. And I think that we need to adapt as a species to these stressors by mitigating them with something. And I believe these two molecules are at the top of my list.
John, when you're working with a new patient, wherever they're at on the continuum of being preventative or all the way to suffering from a chronic disease, what are the foundational pieces you look at in the diet and lifestyle realm to make sure nothing big is being missed?
Yeah, well, that is a pretty broad spectrum, right? I think there's so much to consider within that it can be quite overwhelming to be completely comprehensive with any individual in the beginning. Because, whenever someone's first starting to lean into like healing themselves from a natural standpoint, if they get overwhelmed, a lot of times people's instinct is to kind of shut down, and it becomes difficult. So sometimes baby steps, but other individuals are ready to really go all in. I find that some of my biggest needle movers are fasting, intermittent fasting and extended fasting. Sleep, addressing sleep is probably up there with one of the most important, things with sleep hygiene and looking at a lot of things surrounding sleep. I talk a lot about what I call the doorways, taking care of your doorways. So doorway hygiene, nasal, mouth, colon, microbiome. A lot of people don't really consider how significant some of these entry doorways, because this is where we kind of have that battle between the outside world and the inside world, right? And so when our body allows some of these microbes that are more on the negative side, they secrete something called an endotoxin, or another word is a lipopolysaccharide. And these are the most inflammatory substance, just like crazy inflammation. And so when these get to a certain level, the body can't adapt. The body can't self-regulate because it's too much stress on the bodies. And so we have this mechanism called a cell danger response, another word for it is the Warburg effect, right? So Otto Warburg in the 40s won a Nobel Prize, and it's literally what happens with cancer. And so when the stress gets so overwhelming to the cell, this is the end of totally I throw in the towel, I'm done. And then it turns into cancer. And this is where this shift of making energy goes out of the mitochondria into outside of the mitochondria. And it's 10% as effective as it would be if it was through what's called the electron transport chain. And so this is our way of making energy through these little tiny round vesicles that are found in sometimes the millions to the thousands to the hundreds in the cell, depending on how much energy the cell needs. If the cell needs a lot of energy, like areas of the brain, the inner ear, some areas in the midbrain and the brainstem, have up to 2 million mitochondria per cell, whereas the average cell is maybe 500 or 600 mitochondria. The heart has 3,000 to 5,000 mitochondria per cell, because it's also really demanding. And so this whole conversation about cellular energy is your life force. And if we have enough life force, our body has the resources to adapt to stressors. when the stressors overwhelm the adaptive capacity to the body, the energy shuts down even further. And then you have disease that's going to express itself in unique ways based on our genetics.
I want to try and take this upstream and get into some details in what you just explained. It sounds like at the top, or at least pretty near the top, is this endotoxemia that is originating in the gut. So what is triggering that in the beginning, and how does somebody know whether that's an issue?
Well, we don't want to ignore the mouth and the nasal passage, because the nasal passage can be a source. And the new research is actually saying it is the primary way that we're getting Alzheimer's. And before even the first stages of Alzheimer's, that the beta amyloid plaque starts to build up based on this retrograde through the trigeminal, which could be mouth or nasal. And it goes to an area of the brainstem called the blue spot, or the locus coeruleus. And I talk about the blue spot quite a bit. And the locus coeruleus, it's like one of my favorite areas of the brain, because when you start looking at everything from sleep to taking care of your doorways to being more calm and relaxed and your circadian rhythm, I mean, I could just go on and on. That area of the brain is like such an important area to take care of, because it's the area when you don't take care of it, like releases an inappropriate amount of norepinephrine, which is a stress. So we don't feel good, right? We are agitated. We're anxious. We feel like we need to do something. We're not just at ease in the moment, right? And when we take care of that, then, and we're in a more calm, relaxed state, this is where the body heals. This is where that deep relaxation within sleep is so important. And so if we have some of this endotoxemia type of issues from the nasal or the mouth, we have this like direct activation to these stress areas. And that can be something that can be easily treated, right? If with just some right direction. And we can talk about that as well on some of my strategies. But I like to talk about that. And the reason I'm guiding it that, because everybody's talking about the gut, right? You can go on and you can hear about people microbiome, you can do carnivore diet, which kind of helps with that. I mean, there's all kinds of conversations, but nobody's really talking about some of these other things, which I think really need to be brought forth a bit more.
Okay, I'm just trying to take it upstream and then we can work down. It sounds like the endotoxins then are in these doorways. That's where they originate. But I'm trying to figure out what the actual origin of the imbalance is. What is it? And it might be multiple things. You mentioned sleep there, a piece of this. But how does somebody begin to assess their doorways, where they're at, where their endotoxin levels are at, so they can begin to assess their diet and lifestyle to influence that in a positive way?
Great question. And we're going to have to chunk it down into buckets. Yeah. So let's start with the nasal passage, and then we'll go to the mouth, and then we'll go to the colon. So the nasal passage can build up biofilm, right? So it's the same thing in the mouth. Like that's what plaque is. It's this biofilm. It's a sticky, resiny material, and it's produced by bacteria so that it has a home and it's protected from your immune system. So that's why we brush our teeth. That's why we floss, because we're getting rid of that biofilm on the, around the teeth, so that we don't have cavities that form underneath that biofilm. And that biofilm can then calcify, right? And that's why they chip it off and you go to, get your teeth cleaned. In the nasal passage, it's a very sticky material, and it allows us to be more sensitive to things that are in the air. If you have an airborne virus like COVID, it's like a flypaper. So these things that are in the air have something to stick to, and it has a medium to grow on. And so people are going to get sick more often. They'll be more susceptible to catching something that's airborne, or if they have mold illness or they have sensitivities to mold, that mold is going to have something to stick to. And so essential oils is one of the best things to really break up biofilm. And there's some wonderful essential oils that are antimicrobial, but are very safe for the body, like oregano, sage, clove, bay leaf. I'm a big fan of linalool, which is a terpene from lavender. It's actually quite powerful. Germanium, things like that. So I formulated some products. I had, just full disclosure, I have a company. It's called Mitozen, and we manufacture a number of kind of unique products that address some of these issues that we're kind of discussing. But we have a nasal spray called Glutastat. It's actually one of the first things I made it. I got sick and I was crewing for Tony Robbins, right? And then people were like dropping like a flu. They get sick for 2 weeks. And I'm like, I've just started to get sick and I've got to drive to Fort Lauderdale from here in Sarasota to crew for Tony. And I really wanted to go. I wanted to be there for him. And so I'm like, oh man, I could start nebulizing this, right? Because I could really and start using a nasal spray. So I threw together this essential oil and it put NAC, glutathione, colloidal silver, and I just kind of made this concoction. And the next day I was totally normal. And so that's where Glutastat was born. And we have a version that you can nebulize, which we have patients do, that can really get deeper in the sinuses and the lungs. And it's a really natural way. When you start looking at antibiotics, on the other hand, which most medical doctors are going to push you into, they obliterate your microbiome and they don't really even address the biofilm. And you need, I've even heard 5,000 times stronger antibiotic to kill something that has biofilm. And what you're doing to your natural microbiome is and even more your mitochondria. I mean, there's all kinds of potential negatives. And I'm not saying that antibiotics don't have a place, but they're not necessary for what we're talking about, right? Now you go and you're sick and you got something serious, you need to go to the hospital, you've let it go too far. Antibiotics can be beautiful, but for a lot of the conditions that we see, there's things like methylene blue combined with light, ozone therapy. There's literally things that should be in our hospitals that could knock these things out in a day. I wish I could design the future hospital. Let me put together the emergency room at the hospital and show modern medicine, what can really be possible. I mean, during COVID, we had people come in, we were doing intravenous methylene blue and intravenous laser combined with an intravenous silver. And then we would follow it with vitamin C. And the next day, people were at least 50 to 75% better. Sometimes even after the infusion, they're walking out of the clinic what the heck? Because we're not used to being sick and then not being sick. It's it's shocking that, oh, this is possible. My whole life, I get sick and I'm down for a certain amount of time. And I remember it's quite a few years ago, and it was an ozone infusion, and I was the flu, a body ache. I was sick, and I went and got this infusion. I was fine. It was completely gone, right? And it just shatters your belief of what's possible, right? So essential oils are really good for the mouth. We have a product called Bocazen, which has a bunch of these essential oils in it as well, and so we can kind of talk about the colon.
Well, before we get there, let me jump in. So far we're on two different doorways, the nose and the mouth. We've talked about a lot of different molecules that are in your products and otherwise, including essential oils. We've been coming at this primarily, at least, through attacking an issue that's already in one of these doorways. Let's parse out two different camps there. What you do as more of a maintenance day in, day out when you're feeling good to keep the doorways functioning optimally. And then what you've covered up to this point sounds like more when there's an issue there and we want to help the body fight that off.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a dosage, right? So I have a 30-day sinus protocol. I literally start every patient off with this. And I learned this through my studies through mold illness, right? And Richie Shoemaker was someone that I studied with and was certified. And although I don't completely agree with a lot of the methods that they do, in fact, they still recommend what's called a beg spray, which actually has gentamicin in it, which is ototoxic, which is toxic to your ears. So please don't fall into that beg spray if you wind up looking to treat your nasal passage. The essential oils actually work much better. But anyway, what they found was that if they didn't fix this nasal issue, they couldn't get patients better because they were constantly being, because it goes straight to the brain, right? The nasal passage has just a direct door. And ask a cocaine user, like, what's the quickest way, right? You snort something, it's like it's in your brain right away. So this is something that really needs to be taken care of in order for the brain and the autonomic nervous system, the digestion, like everything really works when the brain is not under a lot of stress and inflammation. So we have a 30-day sinus protocol where we have people use a neti pot and use the glutastat spray 5 times a day for 30 days. And then after that, we'll have them do a maintenance of once a week. And if people are having a lot of nasal or sinus problems, they may want to consider doing a test called a Marcon's test, because Marcon's is this, it's a colony of bacteria that are staph, and they produce a lot of biofilm, and so it's like super sticky, and it's very hard to get rid of, and so. And so this is something that if it's not addressed, then if you're a patient, you're going to a holistic doctor, you're doing functional medicine, and you're not getting the results that you want to get, it might be something like, there's certain things that we found that are roadblocks to the patient getting better, right? And if they're not addressed, we have this challenge for them to kind of get to that next level. Hormones is something that is also important to look at with patients as well, and balancing, the progesterone and testosterone and estrogen and all of those are really important. And when they're out of balance, it doesn't seem like patients can thrive quite as much, because when the body's under so much stress, these are things that really start to take a hit. And then we don't have, thyroid is another really important thing, because that's like the gas pedal to all of our metabolism. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of look at some really key things. And I'm glad we're talking about this. I don't always get into this exact kind of conversation. Usually when people bring me on a podcast, they want to deep dive into melatonin, methylene blue, because I wrote books on both of those, and we just get like deep into that rabbit hole. But I think that what we're talking about is like some really good actionable steps and real life stuff that people can take and use. So I appreciate your questioning.
We're going to get to that other stuff as well. I have a couple hours with you, so looking forward to covering quite a bit. Basically, what I want to make sure before we go to the third doorway is that people know on the most fundamental level how to take care of each of these doorways, because we've thrown so much at them, and you're a mad scientist, and I mean that in the best of ways. And you're getting into all these different molecules. A lot of them are going to be new to a lot of people and different products. And it's just a lot of information, which is great because we're going to have people at all different levels and people that are ready for that. But we also have people that are a metabolic mess right now and looking for the basics and how do I get started? How do I get that momentum going? So in the most general sense, how do we look after and assess these two doorways? You mentioned neti pot. That's something probably a lot of people have heard of. Basically, in a practical sense, so when people leave this, they can begin to assess and to work with what they have. How do they assess and work on those two doorways?
Well, I think this might be a good time to kind of plug in the endonasal and the cranial collapse that happens. These morphological changes that happen to our skulls from modern living.
Let's do it. Perfect.
Weston Price did some interesting studies. He wrote a book called On Physical Degeneration. He's kind of considered the father of the modern raw food movement, right? And then his colleague, Pottinger, did some studies with cats where they fed cats raw milk and raw meat. And then they had the other group of the cats eat homogenized milk, which is really quite bad. And then, which is basically all of our milk. It's required to be like heated up, and it changes things. And cooked meat, right? And they found that the cats that ate the cooked meat and the homogenized milk developed all of the diseases of modern culture, cancers and diabetes and all these metabolic issues. And their craniums collapsed and their teeth crowded, right? So think about how we all need to get our wisdom teeth removed. I was even the same thing. Like, I mean, I was young. Like, okay, it's like your teeth are starting to crowd. You're right at the right age. I think it was 20, and they took out all my molars, right? And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that when they rip those molars out, it leaves a pocket in the bone that then becomes this like little cavitation that bacteria sit there and grow and outgas endotoxins into the system, right? And it's really, especially the upper molars, right into the brain, right? And so people can also have a lot of chronic diseases associated. And this is like one of the main, like if you've heard of biological dentistry, their whole thing is root canals is another one, but it's these cavitations from wisdom teeth being removed, right? And a lot of these like big clinics like Peristalsis in Switzerland, and I think they have some other ones in Europe, they all have biological dentists. And this is like kind of like with me with the doorways, like I got to get this. Like this is like their big thing. Like we have to address these cavitations, right? So if you've had root canal, if you've had your wisdom teeth removed, what you're going to want to do is something called a cone beam, right? And so they do this like CAT scan, and then they can measure like the bone density and determine whether you have a cavitation there. And then they go in and they scrape out that dead tissue, and then they spin your blood down and basically put a graft, and it regrows the bone. And people have these miraculous changes in their health. And it's definitely something to look at. But we're getting a little bit off track. So the crowding of the teeth, why do we need to get our wisdom teeth removed? 100 years ago, people didn't, right? It's because all the foods that we're eating, all these things that are leading to inflammation show up in the nasal passage. Like even if you get like a gut thing, you'll be congested, right? Because you're inflamed. And then when you're not breathing through your nose, you're going to default and breathe through your mouth. And then what happens is everything falls down. And so your palate goes up, right? So it's like a tent. And so as we collapse, the palate moves up and the airways close. And like I just had this kid come in, right? This young 5-year-old kid, and he's just a mess. He's had sinus problems his whole life, and he just has absolutely no airways, right? And we're gonna do this procedure where we place these little balloons in through the nose, and it adjusts the cranium wide, right? So there's a lot of cranial type of adjustments, but my expertise for literally 30 years, because I couldn't breathe through one side of my nose. I grew up in Hawaii, so like I would have to like kind of defend myself as a haole, right? As a white boy with some of the locals, you're out surfing, or I would wind up dating some of the prettier, like, local girls, and like their ex-boyfriend or some of the local boys that were in love with them would like hunt me down, and I got mobbed a couple of times. It was not too fun, but one time I got my nose broken, and it's like for years I couldn't breathe through one side of my nose. And then I heard about this procedure, and I had it done, and it was life-changing. It just opened it up, and I could breathe again. And I got off a CPAP machine, and it was, and I see that all the time. It's like one of the main things I do clinically. People fly in quite a bit, and we do a series of 4 of these treatments. And so when you have this collapsed nasal passage, I always say like you're either a swamp or a river, right? When you're like, what's a river? It's cleaner, right? Things are moving. Nutrients can be brought in, and metabolic waste product can be brought out. Bacteria, viruses, mold, those things, that they love that stagnation, that stagnant areas. So sometimes people are just so collapsed here that you can do the sprays, but ultimately if you open that back up and do the sprays, you can really reset that whole system. And so that's something to kind of look. I actually wrote a book on it. It's called It's All in Your Head. And it's like a whole book on everything airway. And I'm actually at the tail end of a new book called Airways, where we're really expanding and talking about a lot of this kind of this rabbit hole goes really, really deep. Like we could probably do like a 5-hour podcast just talking about it. So it's fascinating.
Well, I want to take it a little bit deeper. This is going to be new for a lot of people. You mentioned a balloon going up the nose. Let's talk about specifically what you're doing and then the impact on the anatomy and physiology when that happens.
So there's a connective tissue layer that wraps around the brain and spinal cord, and it becomes the whites of the eyes. Okay. And what happens is we get adhesions and a locking of this deep connective tissue. And that's part of what holds the cranium in this more narrow, holds the airways down. And so we do this eye test that it's all digitized, right? And we can see how the eyes can be coordinated. So we have a pursuit where the eyes are following a target and like the ability to keep the eyes on the target while it's moving. And what we see is in certain hemifields, sometimes like globally, like it looks like a drunk driver. The eyes can't follow the target and stay on it. So that's called a pursuit. And the other type of eye movement is called a saccade, which is a fast eye movement, right? And that's where you're accurate from one point to another, right? And so there's horizontal and vertical. And so we can map all that and have like this diagram where we can sit and talk about it and look at like what's really happening. And then I do muscle testing with the head and the eyes in different positions and really figure out like where this dura, because that connective tissue is called the dura mater. And dura mater means tough mother in Latin because it's the mother it's protecting, right? It's very, very dense and tough. And so when you release this dura mater, it allows cranial rhythm, which is this movement pattern that brings cerebral spinal fluid that circulates around the brain and spinal cord, which is like they call it liquid light or liquid life. Like it's like really, really important. It has a lot to do with the health of the pineal gland, which is our direct connection to the divine, or like whatever your spiritual beliefs are, God or creation or source or whatever. It's like the non-physical, right? And that movement of that cerebral spinal fluid, the pressures activate the pineal, and it gives us that sense of connection, sometimes even bliss, right? And some people can be like walking around just constantly connected with that, and it's like it just like calms down a lot of the fears that we have, that we walk around with. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, and this can be something super healing for people to then get this reconnection with source. Yeah. And I know this really sounds really woo, but this is something that we see quite a bit when we start to do this cranial work on people. People even have like some significant emotional releases because emotions are actually stored in our connective tissue, kind of like a thumb drive. It's just like with computers, right? So you have carbon, and it's like mapped into that. Yeah. And so when you release that, it can come up for people. And if they can meet some of these thought forms that might be driving us to have certain behaviors or beliefs, or filter reality through them, right? So if we have a belief that life is scary, people are not truthful, or abandonment issues or fear of death, we're dealing with disease, and we're like, all we're thinking about is we're going to die or whatever. Like these thought forms become real for us, and they activate these stress responses in the body. And so if we can bring these beliefs or these thought forms up and keep the breath going and just be curious and just be present with it, it doesn't hold that power, and it's not going to drive all of these negative patterns, mental, emotionally, and spiritually with us. And when we can calm that down, our body, again, we talked about like improving sleep and improving digestion, improving autonomic function. And this is where you start to get into the real science behind the mental, emotional, spiritual with healing. And so this cranial release has a bit of a puzzle to that. And the nasal passage, when you're breathing through your nose, the air actually traveling through the nose we have respiratory rhythms. Yeah. And these respiratory rhythms are pacing something called neural oscillations, or there's another word, limbic oscillations. Are you familiar with the word limbic?
The way I understand it, it's deep seated within the brain, connected to very primal emotions. That's my
Well,
way of
so
remembering.
it's right on. So imagine if we had a thought, and so our brain is wired where there's like connections between a number of different areas. And so the limbic brain is basically going to be telling you whether we're going to have an emotional response to something or not, right? So other parts of the brain are kind of like wiring thoughts, whether it's good or bad. We can do it or we can't do it. We're afraid of it. We're not afraid of it. And so that projects into the limbic brain, right? And the limbic brain is going to tell the locus coeruleus, which we talked about, which is command central for norepinephrine, right? Where it's like fight or flight, right? So it's going to ramp up this like stress response in the body. And so we can change that. Like that doesn't have to be like a permanent state for the brain. We have something called neuroplasticity where the brain can learn new patterns, right? And we can like change and break these patterns based on, software. This is just all soft. It's really sciencey. It's very software and sciencey when you really start to get down to it and like get granular and look at like the mechanisms behind everything.
So to make sure I'm understanding this piece, then you do this treatment with the balloon up the nose, and it's impacting the dura mater. Do I have the name right? Mater. Dura mater. And then this can help us if we're stuck emotionally, or it sounds like physically. It sounds like it's a physical and emotional release that can help you if you're stuck in either of those realms.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can affect TMJ, right? Because the crania structure, the TMJ, headaches, and then chronic sinus issues, right? Balance, ocular issues, neck pain. A lot of times the spasm and the tightness in the neck is associated with some of these inappropriate eye movements. So we have something called the vestibular ocular reflex, which everything's connected. The neck is talking to the inner ears and the eyes, and it's like it's all calibrated, right? And so when you put this in calibration, you don't need to go to a chiropractor 3 times a week for 6 months or 3 months or whatever like that. Like if you address this brain issue, you can do 1 or 2 adjustments and like everything kind of does what it needs to do. But I think one point that I think is really important is, because we kind of like got a little sidetracked, is that when the air goes through the nose, our respiration, like if we're breathing slowly, right, we have this rhythm that's being traced through air going through our nose. And if our nose is not allowing a lot of air, then we don't have access to this connection with like, how are we supposed to be? The brain is basically trying to say like, do I need to be on alert, or do I need to be like, can I be like calm and relaxed, right? And if we're breathing slowly and fully, this respiration paces things in a calm way. And a lot of times people get locked in a sympathetic stress response, and this respiratory rhythm can help break that, right? And so the left nostril is actually the worst one, because that's going to be more parasympathetic, where right nostril is going to be more sympathetic because it crosses from one side of the brain to the other. And so if you're more blocked on the left, then you're probably going to be somebody that has a very, very dramatic change and shift in your life with something like the balloons, although it doesn't have to be that way, but that's kind of how we're wired. So you also absorb 40% more oxygen when you're breathing through your nose versus your mouth. So it's quite important.
All right. So to recap, for the nose, we've gone over the endonasal treatment, breathing through the nose. We've talked about different molecules, including the essential oils. We've also started to talk about the mouth as well, being another doorway, and different essential oils and potentially other molecules we could use to facilitate optimizing that. Let's stay on the mouth right now and talk about other things we want to look at there.
Yeah. So, well, root canals is something interesting because they basically leave a dead tooth in the mouth, and there's little microtubules that are just big enough for a certain strain of um, strep. I think it's either strep or staph, but they live in there, and then they just outgas neurotoxins, this lipopolysaccharide we talked about. So you imagine like if you had a sponge just sitting in your mouth and you have the bacteria protected within that environment, and they're just able to like, and to this day there's still a lot of dentists that will just go to the grave that this is a bunch of woo, but the science is just overwhelming. They did a study with rabbits where they took a root canal out of a human and implanted it just under the skin of a rabbit, and the rabbit got sick. They took it out, rabbit got healthy, right? There's a documentary. It's Root Cause. I think it's on Netflix, and that would be interesting to look at. So yeah, oral hygiene, and then just the gums. If your gums are inflamed, taking care of your gums. That's why I like the Bocazen and some of those stronger essential oils. It has quite a bit of oregano in our That's why it's very spicy. Like when our products are like even the glutastat, like it's like you're getting slapped with a spicy. I mean, it's really strong, but that's what really like kind of gets rid of that biofilm. And the same thing with the Bocazen. And what I like about it as well is that temporary burn activates the vagus nerve, which you have like a bit of an afterglow, calm feeling. And we have eye drops as well that burn temporarily, and specifically we use those for people for meditation. We have a nasal spray called Zen, which is based on hape, which really burns. You got to be very careful with this one. It's quite popular, but it's something a lot of people use with breath work and meditation, because it's that trigeminal nerve is this huge nucleus in the brainstem, and it's hardwired to the vagus nerve because we have something called the dive reflex. So if we put ice on the bridge of our nose, or if we were to fall into like ice water, the sensory nerves around the bridge of our nose get activated, and it just totally drops our heart rate, and it activates the parasympathetic nervous system to a very restful state. So we're wired that way. So we can kind of use that pathway to our benefit in like some regular routines. Like I have some breath work protocols that we use with some of our products. And so our main site, mitozen.club, we actually have a bunch of videos where I've done videos with some celebrities and some people that you probably have heard about. And we do breath work, and we do these products along with it to kind of activate these like deep parasympathetic, because I believe breath work, because we talked about like what types of things could really move the needle for people in the lifestyle, like a breath work routine in the morning, watching the sun come up, grounding. Yeah. In the morning, watching the sun go down can be really important, but it's actually like, cause you're pacing that circadian rhythm. And so if you have a strong signal to the circadian rhythm, you're telling the brain and the nervous system, this is time to wake up. This is time to go to sleep. This is time to wake up. And you have that like clock, like really, really solid. If you clock that in the morning, then the body's going to be more prepared at night to like sleep. So they've actually found that people that watch the sun come up and get sun in their eyes in the morning have much, much more powerful sleep. Grounding and being connected to the earth, and releasing a lot of the built up electrons, because we are, there's really interesting research and books on grounding, and that can be a really powerful way to calm the nervous system down and improve a lot of inflammation in the body and improve the immune system. And then the breath work. The reason that the breath work is so powerful is because we have this aspect of our autonomic nervous system that's broken down into the sympathetic, and we've talked about this a little bit, and the parasympathetic. And this is our fight or flight or our resting and digesting component. And that part of our autonomic nervous system in most people gets too favored with sympathetic, which that fight or flight and that fear, right? And so the digestion is really like governed through our circulation, our body's healing responses, our immune system, that it thrives more in the parasympathetic. And if we can't switch into the parasympathetic and we're always like too much sympathetic, then disease can really fester in the body. And this is what I see today. And we have a lot of things that are activating that, like even EMF, EMF exposure really activates the sympathetic nervous system. It also, if you sleep with like a router, like those EMF, they go through your body, and the pineal, because the pineal is activated from light in your eyes, right? And so you have photons that go through your eyes, and then it goes and it activates the pineal. And so during the day, when there's a lot of light, it's telling us, oh, be awake. Sympathetic nervous system needs to be in action. And then you hear that squeaking sound?
I do.
So that's our nitrous, like when they don't turn it off right. So we're doing a stem cell procedure in the other room, and they sedate with a little bit of nitrous gas where people breathe it. And so that, I hate that sound. But
is everybody okay over there?
If you're in the room, it's like, but no, they turned it off. Yeah, it's just loud. But so we store melatonin when light's hitting our eyes. And so often we wear sunglasses, we're in our car, we're behind glass, things are filtering the infrared, and that near infrared light is really the key. And so these lights, I sit at the beach and I watch people walk back and forth, and they've got these glasses and these hats, and it's like 7:30, 8 in the morning, the sun's just coming up. It's like you're not going to hurt your eyes. You're not going to get cataracts. You're not going to burn your eyes out or get like skin cancer. In fact, it's the opposite. What they found is that when people put all these toxic sunscreens on, and they're like not getting the sun on, that's more susceptible to skin cancer, because your body wants to become accustomed to these things, right? So it's when you go out and you're always protecting yourself, and then you go out on a Sunday and you go to a barbecue and you forget and you get totally burned. That's when it's really too much stress, right? But if you do a little bit every day, and your skin, you've got some color to your skin, and you be responsible about it. This is the way we're designed, and so this non-exposure and then extreme exposure occasionally is what really can cause the damage more so. Even the eyes. I've actually had friends that could stare at the noon sun for 5 minutes and then read their phone, right? Like crazy shit, because they've gotten adapted to it, and their eyes are fine. In fact, they can see better than they did before they were practicing. But they didn't start out that way, right? They built it up and they built it up. And then our cellular structure has the ability to adapt and make changes to be able to handle these things without damage.
You've given a few different pieces there to an ideal morning routine: the grounding, the light, the breath work. Take me to an ideal morning for you. You're in a regular routine in Sarasota. You wake up. What time is it? And then take me through what the perfect morning would be for you.
Well, we just had a hurricane, and like a mass, like my house and my street looked like a disaster zone. We had an 8-foot storm surge, right? So this morning I got on my bike, and I got a little trailer behind my bike where I throw a chair and some water and a towel, because I like to stretch out afterwards. But I go to, like, this morning, like, there's a lot of the beach is gone, but like could find like a little piece of beach, and I sit there and the sun comes up. I have a little portable speaker, and I put methylene blue in my eyes. We manufacture this eye drop called Blue Eyes that has gold, silver, methylene blue, and these deep sea minerals, and it's quite nice. And methylene blue really helps to allow you to really pull photons into the body because it's reflecting blue, but it's absorbing red. So it acts like a sponge. And these red photons are what our cellular structure just thrive with. Because at a mitochondrial level, we can use electrons or photons for energy. But the main photons that penetrate the deepest into our body are in the red spectrum and the near infrared. And so the methylene blue we can take orally, and it has an affinity to our mitochondria. And then it gives us the ability to like pull photons into the cellular structure that then they feed into this electron transport chain. And within that electron transport chain, there's four main proteins complexes. They're named after like complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the fourth complex is actually called the cytochrome C. Cyto is cell and chrome means light. So like they literally named it after like what it's capable of, because we're light beings. Like light is what drives all the information in our body, right? So we literally produce photons at a cellular level. And these photons travel through our body almost like fiber optic cables through our connective tissue. And that's why memories get stored in the connective tissue. It's quite fascinating when you start to think about it. It's like the chemistry is one thing, but then the energetics is really just, I think takes precedent over that even. So the methylene blue gives us the ability to like just pull these photons and use them. And the science behind methylene blue is very, very old. It was a molecule that was developed in the late 1800s. I know we were talking about my morning routine, right? And then I got tracked on these Blue Eyes eye drops, and now we're getting into methylene blue. But like, rein me in a little bit. Where do you want to go? You want me to go back to?
No, keep going on on the methylene blue.
Okay,
and then we'll come back to your morning routine after you explain this.
Okay, all right, great. So the word magic bullet was coined for a molecule that had far-reaching benefits to the body, but left the body unharmed. And so this salt, this brilliant blue salt, was used as a dye, right? And they would dye clothing, right? But they would also dye tissues. And they noticed that when they put it into tissues, that it would have an affinity for the mitochondria. So then certain cellular structures would be more dark versus more light. So they could really see the cellular structures very clearly, especially neurological, because that's where you have a higher concentration of mitochondria. So this guy, Paul Ehrlich, was going to do some experiments with malaria, because malaria was the biggest problem back in the late 1800s, because all of our military was getting sick and we couldn't penetrate these forests and these jungles. We're trying to take over the world. And, not that I think it was terrible what we did. I mean, England, United States, we just kind of wanted to go and like expand our territories, and malaria was getting in the way. So finding a cure for malaria was like the biggest problem at the time. So Paul Ehrlich sat down in front of his microscope, and he got the parasite that's responsible for carrying malaria and put it on the screen. And then he added the dye. And then he has all these different remedies that he's going to check, because now he can see very clearly the parasite with the methylene blue. And then he was going to add an experiment to see which one killed it, right? As soon as he added the dye, the parasite died. So all of a sudden he has his remedy. It's methylene blue. And they're like, oh my gosh, like this is antimicrobial. So it somehow starves some of these microbes of oxygen, but it leaves our cells completely healthy. In fact, it like charges our cells up. We have a metal roof and it's raining. We got like a storm coming through. So I don't know if that's affecting the audio.
I'm not hearing it. No,
you're good. Okay. It's a little bit loud on my side. It's kind of nice, actually, very soothing.
I'm good
that
then.
nice rain. So then they found that methylene blue worked to enhance energy at a cellular level, and so it's an antimicrobial. I mean, like I said, we use it for COVID. It's incredible for viruses, bacteria, mycotoxins, and mold. I mean, it's very broad spectrum, and it leaves the body unharmed. That's why they call it the magic bullet. And it if that's not enough, methylene blue works on the SSRI system, and it's actually it's an antidote for depression. And so they did large clinical trials on depression and found that it enhanced depression better than really virtually anything that they tested. And it really should be the primary treatment for a lot of our mental emotional afflictions that are treated with SSRIs, because SSRIs actually mess up the locus coeruleus. And some of the neuroscientists that I've listened to are quite concerned with the new research that they're finding, because the SSRI doesn't allow the locus coeruleus to work properly, which then you have more stress responses, more norepinephrine, less sleep, less ability to manage circadian rhythm. And then one thing that's really important is something called memory consolidation, where we take our short-term memories from our experiences during the day and we transfer it to our long-term memory banks, where we make sense of what happened that day as it relates to what we've experienced in the past, and we integrate it, right? And this happens when we go into REM sleep every night. But serotonin inhibits this memory consolidation. And methylene blue really enhances it. In fact, they did like phobia studies, and they found that even one dose of methylene blue after doing some of these therapies with patients enhanced the results dramatically, because people were able to consolidate these memories. And so there's just so many reasons for people to consider taking a daily dose of methylene blue. It's just so safe.
You mentioned the SSRI piece. There is some data out there when it comes to safety if somebody is on an SSRI or MAO inhibitor taking methylene blue. How do you feel about that?
It's blown out of proportion a bit. It's based on a few incidences where they were doing a thymectomy. And so they would do an IV of a very high dose of methylene blue. And then because these patients had cancer of the thymus gland, so they needed to dissect every bit of it. They don't want to miss any, right? They want to take the whole thing out so they can see it very clearly when they open it up. And they noticed that there was, I think there was 5 cases that were on SSRIs, and 2 of them actually died because of serotonin storm. But these doses were very, very high, and they were infused very quickly. And the Mayo Clinic retracted that warning of SSRIs with methylene blue, and even like the country of Canada. I think you're in Canada, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So you guys don't have that warning with your version of the FDA. But there is a concern when you start getting into some high doses of methylene blue. If you're in the lower dosing, so when you start getting over like 4 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, for most people, it's like 250, 300, 400 milligrams. You can start getting into some of those trouble spots, but like there's so much benefit from like 20, 30, 40, 100 milligrams a day. And you're still so far within that safety range of having any problems. So this conversation is really something that has scared so many doctors away, especially the patients that need it the most, that are suffering from depression, that really need to be weaned off of. So in our clinic, when we have patients, we actually will get them on a low dose of methylene blue and have them start weaning off. And, just also full disclosure, I practice as a chiropractic neurologist in the state of Florida. I also have a naturopathic degree, which in a lot of states I could have full prescription rights. And but in this state, I practice with a board certified psychiatrist. And so she's a medical doctor, and we also have a cardiologist who's a medical doctor. I've got doctor that's a Chinese medicine doctor that's got his MD. And so, I'm surrounded by like doctors that have this scope that we can take, but it doesn't happen through me, right? So it's a collective team effort, but they really like to wean people off of the SSRIs. And what methylene blue does is it actually treats the cause of the depression in a way that's really interesting. Would you like to dive into that?
Yeah, let's do it.
So nitric oxide, it's got this reputation of just being like this terribly important molecule, and we have to take more of it because it's like good for our cardiovascular system and all these other aspects of health. But there's actually 3 kinds of nitric oxide, and a lot of people don't really break it down like that. And you need to really understand it, because the one that is often like enhanced with a lot of sports drinks is not the good one, right? And it may be okay for some people to take in short spurts before athletic activity, but when people take it ongoing, it can be really, really negative and really put people at risk for stroke and a lot of other inflammatory issues. But it's inducible nitric oxide. Then you have endothelial nitric oxide, and then you have neuronal nitric oxide. And so one of the great benefits of like red light and photobiomodulation is the endothelial nitric oxide. Hyperbaric oxygen really works very well in oxygen therapies on both the endothelial and the neuronal nitric oxide, right? And so methylene blue mops up the inducible nitric oxide, which is the inflammatory nitric oxide, which is the nitric oxide that causes depression. And what elevates this inducible nitric oxide is infections in the body. So we get back to like the doorways, or we might have someone that has a chronic Epstein-Barr infection, or they're being chronically exposed to mold. There's all these different parts like candida. And so now you have the root cause of the depression, which is the infection triggering the elevated nitric oxide, which then when you take methylene blue, it calms that down. And then you have a relief of the depression by treating the root cause. Where SSRIs are really just covering over it and actually making things worse because they're totally destructive to your locus coeruleus, your blue spot.
Really important we went there. And that's where I was actually going to go next, the nitric oxide, because every time methylene blue, one of the negatives, again, side effects with different drugs, but then the nitric oxide is the other pushback that people will have when it comes to methylene blue. So glad we went there.
Yeah, and so then you'll have people say, "Oh man, don't take methylene blue. It's gonna lower your nitric oxide," and it's like this complete like uneducated, myopic view. And in essence, you're not even touching the good stuff. Like methylene blue does nothing to harm either the endothelial or the neuronal, which is the one you want. It only targets the one that you want to get rid of, which is the inducible. You're looking for like sexual enhancement, like men be like, "Oh man," because that's what Viagra works on, right? Like you can take methylene blue and there's absolutely no negative effect on getting an erection, right? Or getting sexually excited even as a female.
Okay. Important for a lot of the guys and girls to hear that.
Well, that's what I thought, because when I first started really diving into methylene blue, I didn't know all this. And I got sucked into this whole thing too. Like, oh man, am I screwing up my nitric oxide? Am I doing the right thing? And then I just dove into it. Really, I dove into it with who I consider the most educated individual on hyperbaric oxygen. And his name is Jason Saunders. And he actually we co-wrote an article in my second edition of Methylene Blue. It's called Magic Bullet. It's on Amazon. And then Brian Richards, who is highly involved in photobiomodulation, his company is called Sonaspace. Now we actually have like an even more elaborative article that's like kind of a bonus add-on at the end of the book. And I'm going to be releasing this third edition of Magic Bullet probably within the next month. but the conversations, we just got into it, and it was like we're all just like blown away, like, oh my gosh, like this makes so much sense, like this is like actually so positive with regards to nitric oxide.
Well, I think it's smart for people to perk their ears and to question all this stuff, because you talked about the history here of methylene blue and the fact that it was originally a dye for textiles and then a dye for surgery. So it's basically, if not totally, a drug. So we need to make sure we do due diligence when we're starting to introduce something like that, that could have potential negative side effects in the body.
You know, there's a gene issue, G6, and it's very, very rare, but it's a pathway that that people have a hard time metabolizing certain things, and like high dose vitamin C IVs is a contraindication with this genetic disorder, and methylene blue is as well. Although I have heard of some people that use it that have that, but I wouldn't recommend it. I've, microdosing, everybody's kind of into microdosing, psilocybin, and other types of compounds that kind of work on serotonin. And I get a lot of questions with people saying, is that safe? And absolutely, totally safe. And in fact, I think even like small doses of methylene blue, even with like MDMA journeys, which is lots of serotonin, can be very neuroprotective and help people integrate their therapy sessions much better. And so I even think that, again, like this is really edgy. Probably I'm going to get a lot of flack for even saying this, but I've seen it, and I've been involved with some of these things, and I've seen much, much better results with, maybe a dose of 15 to 20 milligrams prior to somebody going on an MDMA journey. But this would be absolutely like, most doctors would just be like completely terrified to hear that this is happening. But honestly, like when you really look at the research, there's not really anything in there that suggests that that would be something that would be of concern in those doses.
Okay, so for the average person, adult, wanting to use methylene blue, obviously it's going to depend on, where they're at on their health journey and what they want to accomplish with it. But what would be an average type dose? And the way I understand it, methylene blue can be taken orally. And would you ever recommend taking breaks from it, or is it something you'd want to take every day?
Yeah, so methylene blue absorbs really well in the stomach. You don't really want it in the small or large intestines. The large intestines, there's a few good strains of bacteria that have been affected based on some studies I've seen. And it's interesting. There's actually some good strains that have been positively affected with methylene blue. So it's not like universal, but I would say that probably you don't want to be exposing your large intestine. We manufacture a methylene blue suppository, which has a place with some therapeutic protocols, but that wouldn't be a good way to dose it on a daily basis. And taking capsules, sometimes those capsules don't open until the small intestines. You can start to develop some leaky gut because methylene blue can be a little stressful on the mucus lining. So you really want something that's going to like fully absorb in the stomach. And so drops can be great, but then that turns the mouth blue. So we make what's called a bar. It's called Lumitol blue. And it's literally like a square that is a suspension in palm oil. And so you take and cut it into whatever dose you want, throw it in the back of your throat, and then drink something. And then it fully absorbs like in the stomach. And I think that's probably the safest, best way to dose it. So either a dropper in water, you can maybe take a dropper and drop it in the back of your throat and avoid the blue mouth, or this version with the bars.
Okay, and then dosage, typical dosage.
There's another part to your question.
Yeah, how much would somebody want to take, an adult, just as more of a moderate maintenance dose? And then breaks. Would they want to take breaks periodically?
So it can build up in the mitochondria, right? Even though it has a 12-hour half-life, if you take it every day, then sometimes you get to a point in a week, 2 weeks. I've even talked to people that like 3 days later, they feel like they need to take a break. And it's going to be different for everybody. So you kind of have to experiment with it and see what works for you. For me, I can go 2 or 3 weeks and then I'll take a couple days off and just kind of let myself purge. You will pee blue, and that's normal because that's the way it kind of goes out of the system. And so, like when your pee becomes like clear and it's not blue, that your body's kind of cleared it. And sometimes that remains blue shorter or longer, depending on the individual and how they're kind of moving the methylene blue through their system. So taking breaks is a good idea. Dosage wise, 0.5 milligram to 4 milligrams per kilogram. I really look toward the higher dose works better for depression and mood. You feel really good on higher doses. You don't need those higher doses for some of the cognitive and the neurological benefits and the neuroprotection benefits. If you're sick and you're looking to like eradicate something, you want to be on the higher dosing schedule, and you want to combine light. You want to combine red light in the spectrum of 660 nanometers. And like whenever you're looking at a lot of these devices, they usually will tell you like what wavelength that they're operate at. And so you want to find something that's 660, or go out in the sun. The sun is really a great way to expose yourself. You want to try to expose as much skin as you can, go naked if you can. I usually will have my male patients at about 90 milligrams a day as a maintenance every day, and females somewhere around 40, 45 milligrams.
And yourself, as somebody who's seasoned in using this, I think the way I understand it, for a longer period of time, do you notice a big difference in your cognition and the way you think on a day when you're purging, or if you're purging for a couple days?
Not so much. I have felt like the benefit of the methylene blue, which like I feel more my constitution. I can go longer without getting tired. I can work out. I can lift more weight. I can do a 2-hour podcast. Uh-oh. We just lost. I hope we don't lose internet.
We're still good now.
Oh boy. Yeah. We just lost power.
Okay, we'll see what happens.
Oh boy. We don't want rain right now. I'm trying to dry everything out at my house. Darn it. Mother Nature. Anyway.
So yeah, basically if you have a day when you want to perform, in essence, would you time that around a day when you're on methylene blue? Or if you're somebody now that's been using it long term, does it really matter?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like, I tell you where I really love methylene blue, because methylene blue is going to help you from getting sick, right? So if you were sick, it's going to help you, and it's going to help prevent you from getting sick. It's going to enhance your endurance. It's going to enhance your mental capacity. So like when you're traveling, you really need this stuff. Like this is really, really great to take on trips, right? And that's where really you see it shine. Or like you said, days that you need to maybe do a presentation at work, or you have some more demand, your workout days, it would be good days. And sometimes you might want to take a little bit more on those days. You might find that a higher dose really serves you a little bit better, but you just really have to play around with those ranges, and don't be afraid to go, if you start like searching on the internet, like, if you pull up methylene blue, like I think it's WebMD or drugs.com or something, like the first thing they say, it makes you like, can be deadly with SSRIs. And it's like, why would you want to put that out first? It's like, that's the first line, like it's some sort of a dangerous substance. It's, I love our pharmaceutical companies that are in charge of like the media and like what we're reading. They steer us away from all the natural stuff that works, because they want people to be more, their eyes focused on the pharmaceuticals, unfortunately. So, you'll start to see some things that really will scare you away from methylene blue, but they're not founded in the research. And you kind of start to get the same thing with melatonin.
Well, we'll move into melatonin. I want to pause you before we get there because I still want to come back to your morning routine.
Yeah.
But before we do, on the methylene blue, how long have you been taking it for?
Probably 3 years.
Okay. So long term, but in the big scheme of life, relatively new.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Let's come back to your perfect morning routine at this point. You get on your bike, you have your lawn chair. I think you're headed to the beach. Before you do that though, what are you doing at home? Are you hydrating when you wake up? Are you having coffee? I really want to get into the details.
I make a matcha with powdered MCT. You can get powdered MCT on Amazon, and I love it because it's like very creamy. It mixes really, really well throughout, whatever liquid you put it in, and then honey. Honey, I think, is one of the best, sweeteners. And sometimes I'll put some creatine in there. Sometimes I'll put some lion's mane. Sometimes I'll put some cordyceps. And so that would be like a drink that I would have. And then I would drink some water, sometimes with electrolytes, sometimes without. And, have a nice bowel movement. And then, and then I kind of get ready. I'll oftentimes in a good morning, I'll be up at like 4 a.m. and I'll jump in my hyperbaric oxygen chamber for like an hour and get my last hour of sleep in the chamber, which really saves me time. And then I take my dog, I get on my golf cart, which got destroyed in this last storm, unfortunately, but it was the only way I could get my dog to the beach, right? Because if she runs on the road, her paws get like, torn up or whatnot. So she jumps and I got my bike on the back of the golf cart. We go to the beach and it's dark and we do our run. I bike and she runs. I come back. Then the sun's starting to come up. That's when I get on my bike with the trailer and I go down there. And then I do my morning routine where I ground on the beach. I use the blue eyes. I'm looking at the sun. I'm allowing the sun to kind of really activate my circadian rhythm. And then I'll roll into some breath work. Oftentimes I'm using Wim Hof's app, which you can download Wim Hof's app and it's really easy. It kind of guides you through breaths. I'll set Wim Hof's app at 25 breaths and I'll do the first 15 in through the nose, out through the mouth. And then the last 10, I really go for it in and out through the mouth, which is really getting rid of a lot of carbon dioxide. And you really kind of go into this really blissed state, and then inhale, exhale, I hold my breath. Sometimes I hold my breath for a minute. Sometimes I can hold my breath for 3 minutes. It kind of depends on a lot of different factors with where I'm at. And I'll do 3 or 4 of those rounds. Then I'll do some yoga. I have a towel that I've laid down. I do some yoga. After the breath work, I definitely go into my gratitude and my prayer and I do an intention. I think of the three things I'm most grateful for and then what I want to create that day. Then I do my stretching and then I go back home and I get in my sauna. And I use I love sauna because you get in there and immediately you're sweating because it's these incandescent lights. So it really works best with photobiomodulation versus most of the saunas that you can get. You can be in and out in 10 to 15 minutes and just sweat a whole bunch. Then I take a shower and I go to work.
Okay, I appreciate the comprehensive dive there. If the weather is raining, stormy, anything that doesn't allow you to go outside, how will you modify that?
Yeah, I don't recommend this, but I do my breath work in the sauna. For some people, it might be a little bit much, because you run the risk of passing out with the breath holds and the deep breathing like this. But for me, because you can use the blue eyes and let the photons from the sauna like work similar to the sun, and you're getting a lot of that photobiomodulation and that circadian rhythm activation through the sauna. And then I have a yoga mat, so I can do my stretching at home.
What would you recommend to somebody like me in Ontario in the winter, not having access to going outside for a good part of the year And obviously you could go out to a point and get a little bit of light in your eyes in the morning. But is there a way to biohack that indoors, getting certain lights to, obviously it's not going to be the same extent as nature, but what can I get for indoors to have a similar light effect?
So we have these lights that we actually have them in our mitozen.club. And I think what we should do is like a coupon code for your listeners, so you can get a little discount.
Sounds good.
One of the things I really love, they have a couple of panels. We have like what's called a photon, or I think they just renamed it a firelight, which is one. And it's really nice. It can set in your kitchen. And then there's a bigger one where there's four. And you plug it in and you turn it on, and you just get like, so you can be like in your kitchen, you can be reading, you can be just relaxing, watching TV or something like that. And you can have this just shining on you. And this is going to be, I think, the best, because it's near infrared is a huge component of the sun. And this is where all of the benefit for us. And these incandescent lights put a very, very large amount of these near infrared, where the other option would be these LED screens, that you can find online. And so these LED screens would be another option that you could do, but it's not the power. And plus in the winter, it's nice because it does almost feel like a campfire coming out of these. They're really, really nice. They can be nice almost instead of a fireplace, right? It feels like you have a fireplace right there that you just flip a switch.
Nice. So for somebody, again, up north, not access to good light for a good part of the year, you could do that in the morning while you're making breakfast, making your coffee. Would you say the benefits are similar, or what kind of benefit would you get from that versus being outside?
Yeah, I think you're going to get a really strong active. It's checking all the boxes. Obviously, you can't really. I mean, so the sunrise is that kind of reddish color, right? And so you're getting that with these lights. And then there's there's also something that I've been doing at home that might be worth talking about, where I bought these LED lights that are like kind of lighting for your house, and you can change the color. And so at night I have them at red, but in the morning I change them to blue. And like in my kitchen, I have my cabinets, and on the top of the cabinets, I put these lights all along the top of the cabinets, and I turn them on, and that blue light like just hits the ceiling, and it kind of gives you that sky feeling. And it's really, really nice to kind of activate the circadian rhythm. So I think and it's really inexpensive. Like, it's not expensive to buy these lights. So you can set these lights for blue, and in the morning, turn those all on, which is nice because when you're waking up at 4 a.m, you can basically like mimic, like this daylight experience. And you can feel it too. Like at night, if you've got these blue lights on, it's like you're activated. You're like, oh my gosh, like, and then you turn the red on. You're like, oh yeah, that's what I want right now. So I would invite everybody to play with that. The other thing is stop using the regular lights in your house in the cans or the fluorescent or whatever. Get some. I talk about this quite a bit in my books too. We get into sleep hygiene, especially in the melatonin book. We kind of deep dive into a lot of these different aspects and some of the different equipment that I use at home, and pictures of how I've set things up. But you can get like red rope light that you can put on the stairs, in the railing, outside of your house on the railing. And you can plug those into like little wireless outlet plugs. So then you can have just like a little controller, and you've got your lamps with your red lights, and you just press the buttons and like all the lights come on, right? And you're not having to go turn every light on, but like you turn the lights. So when I come home at night in the wintertime, like I'm not going to my switches on the wall. I'm going to my little remote. I'm turning everything on, and it just turns into this like beautiful red wonderland. And so that's the reason that you want to do that, is there's so much blue and green light from our regular lights that it's going to mess up your circadian rhythm. You're not going to sleep very well. You want to honor this rhythm. It's really, really, there's not much more important than sleep. Even exercise and diet are below sleep. Like, that's how important sleep is.
Well, you were going to get into melatonin before, and I jumped in, wanted to pause you. But I think this is a good time to come back to that. And then also tie it to some of these other sleep hygiene things that people can do besides the red light. So melatonin, a supplement a lot of people know of and have probably taken in smaller doses orally at night. Let's talk about the benefits and then how to incorporate that with other strategies to sleep our best.
Yeah. So the big overwhelming theme in the book, it's called Melatonin Miracle Molecule. It was the first book I wrote, is high dose melatonin. And I was introduced to these super physiological doses of melatonin from Russell Ryder, who's probably the most researched. Like, he's on like over 1,500 research articles. It's insane. And he's in his 80s, and he's been taking a couple hundred milligrams a day, a night for decades, right? And he also says that just about every researcher he knows in the field takes 100 to 2. The 180 milligram is like kind of like about what all the animal models, because life extension, disease mitigation, like let's not even, like, sleep is just a little piece of melatonin. Melatonin is made by every cell in your body. Every mitochondria makes it to quench oxidation. It's our primary antioxidant system. And it even works in the gut. We're talking about the gut and our doorway. Melatonin is secreted by the lining of your intestines, and it stimulates microbiome swarming. And so your whole microbiome thrives on melatonin. And when it doesn't get that melatonin, the bad bacteria overrides the good bacteria, because you don't thrive, that good bacteria. And they've done studies on everything from ulcerative colitis to Crohn's disease with melatonin. They found just amazing benefits because of this connection to our microbiome, because they're on a circadian rhythm as well. And so that's a signaling, because they're like, okay, part of the day I'm going to like grow and proliferate and swarm, and the other part of the day I'm going to just kind of lie dormant, right? And so the signaling to that is melatonin. And when you don't have that signaling, you don't have that robust regeneration of those bacteria. And then the melatonin actually inhibits the bad bacteria, so it doesn't allow that. It's really it's just amazing, like how we were built and designed. It's just so perfect. And so then melatonin also has an anti-cancer. One of the cancers that it just has such a massive, powerful inhibition to is anything that's regulated through estrogen. So breast cancer and prostate cancer are like at the top of the list of that. So anybody with either one of those cancers really should look very closely at melatonin as something to slow the growth down, and at part of that plan that they have, unfortunately our medical world is in control of that situation for the most part. And their go-to is chemotherapy and radiation. And many times patients that are diagnosed with cancer will then go to their doctor and say, hey, I heard about melatonin, or I heard about this, or I heard about that. And those doctors have a very strict regime, because the studies that govern that treatment that they're giving you don't include anything else. And so they are going to be completely closed to anything from like fasting, which, this could be amazing, ketogenic diet, melatonin, methylene blue, some of these things, they're just going to say, don't do it because this is the protocol, right? And then that puts the patient in a really messed up position, because they have to either not tell their doctor, go against their doctor, and it's scary because like they're looking at a life-ending disease. And we work with some patients like that, and it's just it just sucks, because if you look at the research, it's there. countless research that show that when you take melatonin and do radiation therapy, that it doesn't mitigate the negative effects of the radiation, and the patients bounce back, don't have all the negative effects, and it actually enhances the results. But it has not made its way into the medical model because there's no patent on melatonin. So there's nobody that's motivated to educate people, right? You don't have those cute little cheerleaders that are paid a couple $100,000 a year to go to the doctor's office with their cute little skirt and say, "Hey, you should use melatonin," right? They're pushing something else. So it's not in the doctor's medical books, because the medical books are our medical schools are mostly funded by pharmaceutical companies. And then they demand that inside the books, the textbooks, when you research certain diseases like a stomach disease, that you use Prilosec, an acid blocker in the stomach, right? They don't learn that H. pylori is the most common cause, which is a stomach infection, of heartburn, and that it's too little acid in the stomach that's causing the heartburn because we're not able to properly break down the food and trigger the release of the sphincter on the bottom of the stomach to release the food content to then dump bicarb, which is an alkalizing. So the pancreas, in that response to that high acid, dumps baking soda basically to neutralize all that acid, so that material going into the small intestine is not acidic. So literally, when you take acid blockers, you're actually creating an acid material that's then going to destroy the lower part of the gut and cause all these other problems. And it's such a backward education, but it's fueled by finances. It's fueled by big pharma and how they want to push these doctors into prescribing these medicines. It's crazy. They're not learning root cause. They're not learning about what's really causing the disease, because curing diseases it's not profitable. People aren't taking something every day over longer periods of time, which create tremendous profits for the medicines. And so then the researchers and the pharmaceutical companies that are starting to look around to say, okay, let's find the new drug that we can make money off of. And so, this molecule, you can take this a few times and it's going to cure this disease. Well, let's hide that. We don't want people to know that. But this one is going to have a temporary effect, and then have to take it every day, 3 times a day, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is the one I want to spend $1 billion to take it through the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials, get it approved, and then we're going to make a lot of money off of this once it gets to market. And when you start to really look at this logically, it's scary, but it's reality.
All right, coming back to melatonin as a whole, it's a hugely important molecule. And when I brought it up, I wasn't meaning that it was just for sleep. That's just what traditionally people look at it as, a molecule that can help them sleep. And I do believe, even with the way you supplement with it, it is an input best used at night. And unlike methylene blue, it's best taken rectally, because orally, you're not going to absorb very much. So talk about that.
Yeah, studies show orally it's about 2.5% absorbed. And so we manufacture some suppositories called Sandman. And we also have an oral version, kind of like the methylene blue, which is like a bar. And this one's a little different because we have a fairly high dose of CBN, which is a cannabinoid that's just wonderful for sleep. You've got CBD, CBG, and CBN. And they're cannabinoids that all kind of have these different beneficial aspects. And you really want a full spectrum, right? So they have cannabis plants that they grow that are really high in one of those cannabinoids. But I found CBN to just be great for sleep. So we combine that with the oral version. The suppository, we put glutathione with it, because glutathione is actually one of the sleep promoting substances. And that can be really, really beneficial for detox and just for inflammation, for autoimmune, for allergies, for enhancing the brain, We also have magnolia and linalool, which from lavender. So we've kind of like blended it with some things that are synergistic for sleep. We have a 200 milligram and we have a 400 milligrams. So it's Sandman and Super Sandman. And suppositories release slowly over many hours. And so that slow release allows our peak, something called peak plasma, which is where it's available in our bloodstream so that our cells can pull it up and our body can absorb it. Where when we take things like in an injection or even orally, oftentimes peak plasma is only like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And so even though it might be higher in the blood, the cells can only absorb at a certain rate. So it's still like trying to bring in as much as it can. So you can get a lot more absorption if it's a slow release over a long peak plasma period, which suppositories can be 5 to 7 hours. Plus, it's going to maintain that melatonin for that, like what it's normally pulsed in the body over that sleep cycle. And even time released melatonin, which you want to stay away from. Those are all the quality of the melatonin is compromised, and they don't really work very well. The slow released melatonins, but yeah. So there also we manufacture an NAD suppository. A lot of people are into NAD for mitochondrial and anti-aging purposes, and that actually is in my opinion, a much better way than going and sitting at an IV center for 3 to 5 hours and paying $1,000 to $1,500 for. So yeah, rectal absorption. There's a lot of substances. Glutathione absorbs very poorly orally. A lot of polyphenols, like curcumin, quercetin, stearostilbene, which is really wonderful for fasting and autophagy and inflammation. Those all absorb very poorly orally, so we put a lot of those in our mixtures. So yeah, I mean, it's not a big deal. I mean, some people kind of think, I'm not gonna put some in my butt, especially like some men, like, oh no, but it's like 2 seconds. Like you don't even know it's there. It's like this tiny little kind of bullet shaped thing. It goes in right, it kind of, once you get it like right at a certain point, it just kind of pulls up into that lower part of your colon. You don't even feel it. You wash your hands, you're done, and you're off, and you're like, it's like you're walking around hooked up to an IV. And so if you're somebody dealing with some significant diseases, like this can be life-changing for you, and you really can feel the difference with this absorption method. And so some people are just forced to experiment and be more open to suppositories. They kind of get pushed into that through just the need because they're just so sick. And other people like biohackers, and they're like, hey, I'm adventurous. I'm willing to try things that are like not common because I really want to maximize my physiology. I want to feel my best. I want to be at my best with my business and my relationships and my purpose and my mission in my life. And they're like pushed to do things a little bit more than what normally people would do. And those are the people that seem to gravitate to these products.
When we talked about methylene blue, we got into the fact that it's good to cycle that periodically. A product like Sandman, either the 200 or 400 milligrams, is that something you're taking nightly, or do you take breaks?
So melatonin, kind of like methylene blue, they're actually really powerful together, and they work on the mitochondria in different ways and very synergistic, right? So methylene blue kind of gets into the mitochondria and like lubricates the energy. It enhances it about 30%, right? So you've got that more capacity. But we talked about how methylene blue can be antimicrobial, right? Where melatonin, it gets in the mitochondria, and because it quenches oxidation, it raises this. So there's something called hormesis, right? So there's a hormetic window, right? And basically what this means is that we have like a threshold of stress that we can tolerate, and a little bit of stress. So this window, what they call the hormetic window, within this window, we get a gain in health because it's stress that activates adaptation responses in the body that make us stronger. Like gravity activates us to produce more bone and get thicker tendons, and like we need gravity to have a stronger physical body, right? Fasting is another stress, right? So when we fast, our body goes into stress. Sun can be a stress, right? Because the skin is under stress from the sun. When we take melatonin, we can tolerate much more stress before we reach that top end of the hormetic window, where we get into what's called the danger zone, where the cell no longer can adapt to stress. And this is where disease can really start to come into place. But infections kind of have the same thing. So we have a certain amount of infection that we can tolerate before the body shuts down and we get into a real danger situation. Like it's called the cytokine storm with I mean, they were talking about a lot of that with COVID, like, oh, the cytokine storm. And then we have like, respirators and death and blah, blah, blah. So melatonin was one of the primary treatments for COVID until, they really started to push. They had to get rid of any other treatment options for COVID because if they couldn't maintain their emergency access to the vaccine, so that they didn't have to have all of their clinical trials and researches to prove the law says there has to be no other alternative, right? But yet your country did a really cool study on melatonin. It was like 40 to 60 milligrams a night. And they actually found 54% less transmission with COVID. Like it was like protecting people from even catching it, which you didn't get with the vaccine. And the other thing is they did research with melatonin with viruses that were just as lethal as COVID, if not more. And they found survival rates literally went from 94%. I'm sorry, survival rate of 6%. So 96%, 94% of the animals in this study died. They gave them melatonin, and then they redid this study, and they found that it was almost opposite, where they had like an 80-something% survival rate with melatonin on board, because it allowed that cytokine storm to not be as threatening to the system, because the system could like maintain its energy levels to fuel the immune system to keep working and not shut down, because it's that hormetic window. It's really, really fascinating. And so when you combine methylene blue and melatonin together, you have this like really powerful synergistic aspect to. One aspect is like human performance, right? Which we can talk about that with athletes and just, executives and biohacking and stuff like that. But then when we have a disease or an infection, we can start looking at higher doses of these substances to deal with that. And so you've got this stuff in your medicine cabinet, and it's like if you get sick, you might want to take the Super Sandman instead of the Sandman. You might even want to take up to a gram of melatonin. And there's no toxicity to melatonin, and there's no negative feedback loop. So we don't stop our own production ever. Like you could take hundreds of milligrams of melatonin every day for years and then stop. And the next day you will produce the same amount of melatonin through your pineal for your circadian rhythm that you would otherwise, because it's a completely independent system that's based on light that goes into your eyes. And that's why you don't want to wear sunglasses all the time. You want to get out in the sun, because you're going to build pineal melatonin that way.
So are you taking breaks, or are you having one of these suppositories every night?
I only take breaks when I forget, or I'm in a situation where I'm traveling or I'm staying somewhere and I forgot my stuff, but it's never intentionally. I prefer to take it every night if I have access to it. And I'm 54 years old, right? I mean, I got to tell you, 10 years ago, I looked older than this. My skin, I went through 10 years of severe Lyme and mold illness, which I almost killed me. And I mean, I looked like I was 80 years old at one time. And it was a few years after that I got turned on to high dose melatonin. But it's been just an amazing journey. I put it on my skin. We make a cream, a melatonin cream called Mitoskin. I put it on my face every night and every morning. I take it orally. it's absolutely a miracle molecule, and there's no, in the same situation with methylene blue, I just don't see any downside to it. And we probably wouldn't have to do these things, except in this modern world, there's just too many stressors. And I think that we need to adapt as a species to these stressors by mitigating them with something. And I believe these two molecules are at the top of my list.
Okay, so for melatonin, you mentioned the two different supplements you make, 200 milligrams, 400 milligrams. How does that compare to something somebody would go pick up at, say, a health food store that they would take orally at night, dosage-wise?
Yeah, well,
we know it's not going to absorb as well orally, but just to get an idea of the spectrum of dosages.
Well, yeah, I mean, some experts will say, they're totally against melatonin, and they feel like it's dangerous. And it blows my mind that these people are, and sometimes it's all about, well, because of sleep and this and that and the other, or you don't want to monkey with the system. Like Peter Attia, who I respect. I mean, he's got some great content, but he's one of the people that Andrew Huberman also. Very down on melatonin, and their whole conversation is based on sleep. And they're like, Andrew Huberman talks about a hamster study that their gonads basically shrunk when they took melatonin, right? And so that study is a Siberian hamster, and Siberian hamsters have a breeding cycle that's based on the length of the day, right? And so the longer days, they're more active. They're not breeding as much, right? Where during the winter months, where shorter days, they're more breeding, right? And so there's going to be less melatonin because they're not subjected to as much light. And so they're built for these gonads to shrink and grow back, right? We don't have that mechanism. There's never been a study, not one, that shows any negative effect to hormones. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I have a chapter in my book all dedicated to hormones, and for everything from fertility. It improves your hormones. It supports your glands. It's quite the opposite. And it's really unfortunate that this conversation is just quenched, and he keeps on. I mean, I see it on social media, and they have companies that sell like a sleep substance. Ditch your melatonin, and like, this is the best sleep. And they're totally ignoring like all of these benefits of melatonin. And after the age of 40, melatonin just drops off the chart. Like, it goes like, especially like when you get to 60s, you get like nothing. And so I don't think that there's one better anti-aging, life-enhancing substance you could do, or biohacking thing that you could do, than supplementing with melatonin.
For a practitioner that's open to melatonin, but they're conventional minded on dosage, what would a conventional dose be, though? Would it be under 10 milligrams?
They're basically filtering through sleep. And so they're looking like, what is the minimal dose that people, and you can take, it's really homeopathy, and homeopathy is powerful, right? But if you take 2 or 3 milligrams and you're only absorbing 2.5%, it's such a tiny, tiny amount. But that's plenty enough. It induces sleep. People, they go to sleep. And so oftentimes these people are looking at the minimal effective dose, because their thoughts are that the higher the dose, the more it's monkeying with the system, and it might be dangerous. But they're not really stratifying and looking at the. So Garrett McNamara is calling me. I didn't know my phone was on. Have you seen 100-Foot Wave on HBO?
I've seen you talk about it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. So Garrett and I are doing an event in Nazaré in February. It's called Breath and Biohacking. We're going to do one portion of it here in Sarasota, and we're teaming up with Stig Severson, who has got the breath holding record. He's got a documentary called 22. And so I'm going to be working on human performance. Stig is going to be like teaching people breathing and breath holding and safety. And Garrett is going to be teaching people about surfing and like addressing your 100-foot wave, and the psychology and the spirituality behind that. So we're going to have a section here in Sarasota, and then we're going to go to Nazare, and we've got about 20 spots where people can literally be personally coached by the three of us. Because I did this last year, and he pulled me into a 40-foot wave, and it was such a bucket list. So anybody out there that's a surfer, reach out to me about the potential to get involved. Maybe you ought to come down for it. It's going to be unbelievable. Breath and biohacking.
That sounds amazing. When is it?
February. February 17th, 18th is going to be here in Sarasota, and then the 25th, 6th, and 7th is going to be in Nazare, Portugal.
All right, before we part ways, I want to come back to our 3 doorways. We covered the first 2 early in the conversation. We've been talking about suppositories, obviously related to that 3rd doorway. Anything else we want to talk about related to the rectum?
Well, butyrate is kind of an interesting substance that deals with the microbiome, because a good healthy microbiome produces a lot of butyrate, and butyrate really helps with our insulin and our blood sugar regulation, our gut brain connection, our metabolism, neuroprotection. I mean, look up butyrate, and it's just a laundry list of benefits to our body. It helps us to detox, and so we produce a suppository called Probiomax, which is butyrate and some probiotics. Because when you take probiotics orally, very little gets down into the colon where you want them. Like the small intestine doesn't hold. You don't want bacteria there, right? You want it to be in the colon. So it's very hard to get it there. So I think that can be an interesting way to support the microbiome. You can take butyrate orally, which I recommend. You can find it. Body Bio makes a really good. I love that company. They have a lot of really good products. We use them. I personally take 2 or 3 of those pills 2 or 3 times a day, and find that has really, really helped my just my overall health and well-being. That's something a lot of people don't talk about, I think, which is really important. We need to be able to really detox. Butyrate really helps to kind of wash toxins out of the cell membrane, which is those oil-based toxins, which, by the way, those lipopolysaccharides, those endotoxins, they're fat soluble, and they accumulate in our cell membranes. So does heavy metals and all the chemicals. And so phosphatidylcholine, which Body Bio makes a really good liquid one, and I take that quite a bit as well. And then I also recommend people take binders. It's in the morning before bed is the best time to take it. And those can be some really good daily strategies to really kind of if you're trying to mitigate a mold illness or any illness, really, chronic inflammation, that can be a really good strategy. It's something that I don't normally divulge some of these. These are some of the secrets we use with our coaching clients. Anybody that's listening to this, if you're a health coach or you're a doctor or you're just somebody really looking to take your health into your own hands, you're getting some real gems here that I don't and haven't really shared out in public. But these are some of the key things that we actually work with a lot of chronically ill patients through our distance coaching programs.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate it, John. And last question for you. When you went over your morning routine, you talked about your matcha drink you have. You also mentioned electrolytes. I think they're sometimes in the morning mix. But talk about when you actually break your fast and what a typical day of eating would look like for you.
Yeah, I haven't eaten yet today, and it's 4, right? I had lunch. I actually put lunch in my air fryer, and I ran late with patients, and I had to do this podcast, so I didn't get a chance to eat. I've got so I have an air fryer here at work, and what I do is I take a glass container, and I chop up vegetables, maybe put a little rice, and I'll have some fish or tofu. Sometimes I do some grass-fed meat, beef, And I just throw that, and it's like a home cooked meal, right? I never eat out, really, very, very occasionally. I don't hardly ever eat breakfast. Maybe I'll have a few macadamia nuts in the morning, but very rarely have breakfast. Sometimes I do, though. Like if I fast and I'm breaking a fast, I'm like, I want to have a big meal in the morning, at lunch. I want to like really refeed and activate that mTOR, which is that, rebuilding, right? And it's just as important as the fast is the refeeding component. One kind of interesting point, we talked about these polyphenols with quercetin and curcumin and stearostilbene. Fisetin is another one that is from strawberries. Very, very powerful at clearing all these cellular structures and senescent cells and this autophagy. And it's this really like cleansing effect that fasting creates. Well, you can take these polyphenols in conjunction to really enhance the effects and amplify the effects of fasting. So we make a suppository called Lucitol, which has all of these polyphenols in it. It's really good for quenching inflammation in the brain. So we use it with a lot of our neurological cases because there's a lot of neuroinflammation associated with a lot of these cases. Or we have what's called a fast track fast kit, which the crux of it is this Lucitol during the fasting phase. So you can also do it when you're intermittent fasting. So sometimes I take it in the morning, and then that gives me that, or before bed, and it gives me that accentuated kind of autophagy cleansing. So.
All right, John, really appreciate the talk. It sounds like you're going to give us a discount for your supplements, so we'll link that up. We'll link up your books, your social media, your website, everything in the show notes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Jess. You've been a great. I got to tell you, I've done a lot of podcasts, and I don't know if it's just me right now or a combination of you and I and our chemistry, but I got to say, this is probably one of the best interviews that I think we've been able to. This is probably one of those podcasts people might want to listen to 2 or 3 times, because we went through things very quickly, and we talked about a lot of very kind of deep scientific, but I think we broke it down in a fairly simple way. And I would recommend people maybe even pause it and do a little bit of research on some of the things that we talked about. And I think that this podcast would be something for some people to really, really understand some really beautiful things in staying healthy and youthful in this day and age.
Well, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your openness and sharing. And I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, you're welcome.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
I found online Mad Hatter's disease. What is that? People making felt hats were using mercury as part of the process. They were known as Mad Hatters, right? Alice in Wonderland story. I was a Mad Hatter.